In the last few minutes, Labour has announced it's abandoning plans to spend £28 billion a year on environmental projects, blaming the policy U-turn on the Conservatives crashing the economy. The move represents a major backtrack for Keir Starmer, who just days ago said the investment in green initiatives was desperately needed and that his support for the spending plan was unwavering. Labour insists it still has a green plan to create jobs and deliver clean power by 2030. The reversal's been criticised by former Shadow Minister Barry Gardiner.
The Conservatives made the mistake of borrowing to consume. We should not make that mistake. We should borrow to invest. That investment is in growing the economy, creating the new, clean, green jobs of the future. And actually, it's about giving people a vision of how much better things can be. I think it's the wrong decision. I think it's economically illiterate.
Joining me in the studio now, TalkTV's political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald. Hi, Alicia. And economist and environmental researcher Laurie Laybourn. Good to have you both here. And down the line, I'm joined by Scarlett Maguire, director at JL Partners Polls. Good to have you on board, Scarlett, too. Let's start with Alicia to just paint the picture of what seems to be one of the most extraordinary about faces that we may have seen, I was going to say, for about a week or so, because we're seeing them all the time. It's not like there's anything new about politicians asserting something, you know, tub-thumping vigorously and then changing their minds, all in public, where they can be judged for doing exactly that. It's the most amazing way of behaving and conducting a political career, in my view. But what do you think?
This does happen a lot, yes, but this one is particularly rare. Why? Because Labour are in opposition. They've been in opposition for a very long time now, and they first came out with this pledge in 2021, so a long way before a general election was ever going to be. And the issue there was that they put this really big and very precise figure on this pledge. They said they will spend £28 billion if they come into government. That was then watered down last year, and then now we're hearing that it's totally been dropped. And they keep emphasising that the policy hasn't been dropped, they're just not attaching that number to it. And we're hearing rumours now that maybe that's going to be around £23.7 billion, but over the space of 5 years, with half of that borrowed and half of that being made up from funds generated by a windfall tax on energy companies. So there's a lot of changing here. And as you were just saying, it's the messaging. Keir Starmer just 2 days ago saying on broadcast media, yes, we will pledge for that £28 billion. The 28 was really, really important. And then other senior members of the shadow cabinet coming forward and refusing to use that figure, kind of implying that they were going to drop it. So it's been a bit of a mess for Labour.
OK, have they dumped it because it's too expensive? Have they dumped it because it's not popular and nobody really cares about it? Why have they dumped it when they didn't have to dump it because they're not even in power and nobody would be expecting them to deliver on it anyway? It seems like the most peculiar policy. Why have they decided to do this right now? No one made them do it.
Well, Labour have very explicitly blamed the Conservatives for this. They have said it is because the Conservatives have overspent and they are going to inherit a very difficult financial and economic landscape from them. They blamed Jeremy Hunt, they blamed Liz Truss, they blamed everyone before them, basically, and said that that is the reason why they absolutely cannot commit to this much money. And I think the other thing here is because it's a green thing, they know that it's quite divisive within the public. They know lots of the public haven't bought into it. They know lots of the public think it is a waste of money and we haven't quite nailed how to make it affordable for your average British person. So I think they're aware of that. So they have decided to just water it down and try and find a way to go ahead with it without being so precise so they don't have as much scrutiny towards them.
Gosh, let's bring Laurie Laybourn into this. I mean, your thoughts, the ones that you can say on television without getting me fired or yourself. What are your thoughts on this extraordinary about turn?
I mean, I think, so the country needs investment. It's desperate for it. The economy's in an absolute state. The energy crisis that we've all experienced on our energy bill shows that we're not as energy insecure, and we've got the looming threat of the climate crisis coming towards us. So we need investment. One of the problems, I think, with politics at the moment is we don't have a proper political discussion about that. What Barry Gardiner was just saying in the segment before was that in the past, governments have borrowed to consume. He means spending that on things that aren't investments in buildings and the economy. We absolutely need those investments on buildings and the economy. Labour have said they're going to do that. The number, I agree with your point about you sort of throw numbers around, and that doesn't necessarily tell us the right thing. Labour's plans, which my understanding they're still holding on to, of making power in this country, electricity, zero carbon, that could cost more than 28 billion. It could cost less than 28 billion. It could be paid for by public investment or private investment. And when the government invests, often private investment comes. So it's less about the figure, it's about what the outcomes are, and the journey there will cost a certain amount of money.
If he hadn't changed his mind and said he's not going to do this, What would you envisage, Laurie, the spends and the investment being in and looking like, and what would the country be as a result of that if he had delivered on what he promised, if he ever gets into a position to deliver? I read a really interesting piece in one of the papers today, one of the broadsheets, saying, anyway, who knows if Labour really will become the governing party. They might not. We'll have to talk about that with Alicia many occasions to come, I'm quite sure. But anyway, assuming that they did, assuming that they implemented it, how would it change an ordinary person's life?
So this is an excellent question, because this is the kind of discussion that we do need to be having publicly. Less on the money that needs to be spent, more on what could be achieved.
Yeah.
So it would mean that our buildings would be much more insulated, so that we're not as exposed to the type of energy price increase we saw over the last few years. It would mean that there would be...
And hang on, do you mean public buildings, or do you mean private dwellings, or what do you mean?
Private dwellings as well.
Do you mean all the social housing that's never built by any government, decade after decade after decade? That notional housing that might notionally lose energy through notional windows that don't exist because the housing's never built, doesn't exist. That kind of housing, is that what you're thinking
the
about?
notional housing as well as the current housing.
Excellent.
But that's partly down to the planning rules to make sure that housing developers cannot build this rubbish housing that is going to fall down in 10 years' time. That's still drafty. That means energy bills are high.
Much danger than building it. There's nothing being built much, really, is
well,
there?
the great thing about investments that reduce carbon emissions is that they also deal with other things that we need to deal with anyway at the same time, like the fact that we are exposed to high energy prices, like the fact that we don't have much investment in really high quality jobs in this country, and the list goes on. And that's why what is described by politicians as green investment is so important for this country.
Well,
and
what
other
is the
countries
phrase that you've just used, investment in high quality jobs? What does that mean?
So a good example of this is that, let's say, and I think to be fair to Labour, this is in their plans, let's say that you want to insulate a load of the current buildings, not the notional ones. You can't outsource those jobs necessarily to China. You need people in this country putting that kit in. Those jobs can, if we do it right, be unionised jobs, can be high-paying jobs. They're often skilled jobs as well. So many of the things that we would need to retrofit the whole country to reduce emissions will also be things that will create lots of jobs. And some of the information in Labour's pack about their announcement today show that we could be creating hundreds of thousands of jobs, and those figures are confirmed by other experts.
Is that what you understand it to mean?
Well, yes and no. I think that's...
You had a quizzical look on your face there, so
well,
why?
I just feel like you kind of hit the crux of the issue. So many people don't know what this means.
That's why I'm asking the question. That's my job.
But
what the hell are we talking about? What is it?
Exactly.
What's it supposed to be, and what will it not be? I mean, if we don't know that, we don't know what we're talking about.
It's like, making renewable energy and all of these things are just kind of peeling away from our traditional reliance on fossil fuels, on the materials we use, yes.
Well, we're not. So interestingly, we become way less reliant on fossil fuels as time's gone on, right? Because we were the first country to properly use fossil fuels at scale, but our use as coal has collapsed.
I'm not saying, I'm saying like that's kind of what they're getting at when they say green investment. Like they're just trying to push further and further away, more towards, environmental causes and using better materials and, doing things that are more sustainable in a typical manner.
Okay, just explain, Laurie, how insulating a public building, let's say a town hall, let's say, right? How is that an investment? What's it an investment in?
Well, firstly, I think it should be in private dwellings. I think we should be supporting people who can't afford it to be able to install insulation. We had that in this country prior to 2012. Then the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, said he was going to cut the green rubbish, and that led to a collapse in the support we gave to people to insulate their homes. Then a number of years later, we then had the massive increase in energy prices that we experienced recently. People's bills, people would have saved so much more if we'd supported them to insulate their houses.
So you're saying an investment in people's bank balances?
No, an investment in... This country has a certain amount of buildings and housing stock, and the cost... What subsequently had to happen is the government had to step in and give people the support to be able to pay their bills. That support costs way more than the insulation would have cost to install. So it would have saved us as taxpayers money. And that's the thing about investment. It pays after you invest.
Yes and no, though. So this was a big Labour plan for a long time. This was part of this green investment pledge. They wanted to insulate all the homes across the UK. And when they calculated it, they found out that would cost a lot of money, as well as being really, really hard to roll out, to have access to every single person's home in such a short space of time. was actually quite practically really, really difficult. And that's another announcement they've made today. They've now said they're extending the period of time, they've extended the window of time, basically, that they've allotted themselves to be able to achieve that. They gave themselves another very strict deadline, just like they did with this very specific financial figure, and they've now watered that down as well. So yes, I get what you're saying, totally, but the counter-argument to that is definitely that it's actually just really difficult to implement in the first place, and it still is costly.
Let me bring Scarlett Maguire into the conversation. Scarlett, thanks for being here. Obviously, you're the person who can take the temperature of the nation and tell us how much the nation, particularly potential voters, will care about this. Will they be deeply disappointed? Will they feel let down? Is this something that might have persuaded people to vote Labour? Or is it something that they thought was expensive, that they were suspicious of, and as Alicia's implied, might not even really have understood in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends which voters you're talking about. So voters as a whole, the environment isn't as important to them as things like the economy, NHS and immigration. But you see particularly Labour voters do care very strongly about it, and younger voters do as well. So I think there'll be parts of the electorate that are very disappointed with this decision. I think the bigger problem, however, though, is that it undermines Keir's brand, or rather it exacerbates some anxieties that people already had about his brand, which is this idea that he goes back on what he says he's done. And that's actually something, when you talk to people in focus groups, they say, oh, is he going to be just like all the other politicians and go back on his word? Is he going to row back on this? And they already sort of suspect he's a bit like that. And I think this could reinforce it.
Do you agree?
Totally. I mean, as Scarlett was saying, it's not to say that this pledge doesn't matter to anyone in the country. For a lot of people, it will be quite damning to hear this news today. But I think that the more impactful implication of this has been looking at the Labour Party's messaging. It's been looking at Keir Starmer, who just 2 days ago said, we're going to spend that £28 billion. And then today, we're not going to spend that £22 billion. And it does just further send that signal of uncertainty from the Labour Party. Do we trust them? Do we believe that they're going to keep to their word with all these big commitments that they make? And I think that's the more impactful part.
Should we be disappointed?
I think that if let's say Labour were to get into power, I think that we would be pretty confident that they would increase public investment in a big way. And this is the other side of this story, is that it's helping the Tories avoid scrutiny from the fact that the amount of investment they have done in recent years has collapsed. We are now one of the lowest investment countries in developed nations. And we see that all around us. It includes a £11 billion unpaid maintenance bill in the NHS. It includes schools falling down on our heads. The list goes on. We need investment in this country.